So we are like seriously over, but I am totally in love with Andy's presentation, and I'm not going to let you go. I'm really sorry. If you got to go pee, you better go now because Andy's going to jump up here. I'm going to do as quick of an introduction as possible, and I'm going to hand this over to Andy because I'm desperate to hear what he has to say. It's such an amazing story. I have a feeling that even I will get emotional hearing his story, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's a big deal for us in Canada here because of the impact to not only Canadians, but even the industry as a whole. I literally tripped over Andy by talking to Sean. I've been mentioning Sean's name for a while. Sean and Andy awkwardly are brothers. Sean's last name is not Jackson, it's McPherson. So how they're brothers? Well, they're brothers from birth, and there's a whole story to that I don't think anybody needs to know. But if you're curious, you may ask me, Andy. And Andy works as a power engineer for a private entity in the Fort McMurray area. And I'm being very cautious how I describe this. Please, I hope you appreciate that. And Andy was present during the disaster that ensued last year in the region. And as a result, he was essentially stuck there, for lack of a better term, and had to deal with it. And he had to do something that has never been done before, not once, twice. And probably multiple times in between of different types, but this particular thing he had to do twice, and he had to do it with short staff, short teams. And I think what we're trying to say is, I've been in some meetings here at the Crown, where the Crown says, you know, we'll just hire our retirees, they'll come and help us and do this during a disaster scenario because, you know, our staff are going to be working from. Reality is, you can't count on anybody coming in the region. If you really want a disaster plan, have your staff out of region, especially in the technology space. And I'm really hoping that you'll see some of the challenges that Andy faced and the organizations in plural that were surrounding the individuals and the disaster that actually caused that whole place to crawl to a halt, and the impact of the GDP that he's going to go through even on that sense. I'm sure you'll be thrilled. So thank you. Can we have a warm welcome for Andy all the way from Fort McMurray? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Neil. Thank you very much. Yes, I am from Fort McMurray. My name is Ande JACKSEN. I'm new to the Ottawa area, but only in this context. I do have family here for all my life. It's kind of weird because I have nothing to do with tech, but I do have something that's very important in saving your stuff, if you will. I started with this corporation about 7 years ago. We are one of the largest refineries in North America. And just to give you a broad outline of what a power engineer does, we just basically, we keep the lights on. I specialize personally in water, but power engineering isn't just water. It deals with all facets of utilities, if you wish. Water, steam, power generation, air, nitrogen supply, which is very important when you're trying to keep a lid on things, especially with tanks with 25,000 barrels of liquid naphtha. So on a daily system, we're going to monitor pressures, temps, and all that sort of things, just, you know, standard day-to-day operations. We are a land of trees, very, very much an outdoor community. We have a lot of hiking, fishing, biking, hunting. And it continues throughout the winter as well. We have a junior hockey team. But basically, because of our isolation, we are very close-knit community, right? We have people that fly in and fly out, but basically the core foundation of Fort McMurray is very close-knit because we are so isolated. There is only one way in and out of Fort McMurray. If you're on the highway, that's Highway 63. And you've heard about a lot of the problems we've had over years with a two-lane highway. And as you can just imagine by looking at this load, if you will, you're behind this, he's doing 40 kilometers an hour, you got 250K to get to where you want to be. It's going to take you some time to get around it. So that's why they did finally twin the road and make it a little more accessible going back and forth. And fortunately, guys like this don't go until the wee hours of the morning. And in the end, it's all about oil. It's all about production, it's all about money, and it's all about GDP for the country, because without oil, Alberta is pretty limited to what we can produce. The site that I work at has got about 4,500 employees, regular employees. We'll have 3,000 to 5,000 employees during turnarounds. That's with major maintenance schedules. We're a 500 megawatt facility, so you want to go big? Keep in mind, bigger is not always better, regardless of what the girls tell you. We produce about 125 million barrels of oil annually, $50 billion investment, and we are, $6.5 billion in annual revenues. When you cut that out for any length of a time, you are going to notice it. And it gets very complex. Like I said, we have intricate systems that need to work together and cannot be just taken down and just simply walked away from. There's cooling involved, there's inert gases involved and keep things at bay. And if you see that last little blue thing over there, that was a critical piece of infrastructure that we needed to save up in the corner. Control room, very basic, it's actually where I work. Monitoring equipment's taking care of pressures. If there's anything in the field, contact field personnel and make sure that they're available to make the changes that we need done to maintain production and keep things going, keep things flowing. And we do deal with a lot of cooling. I know with your systems as well, you're dealing with cooling water systems. Just to give you a little bit of insight, as I mentioned, we do about 350,000 barrels a day of synthetic crude. Of that, these processes require about 250,000 gallons a minute of cooling. And just to give you an idea of what that is, there's a water tower over by Stittsville, and you can empty that in about 5 minutes. So cooling is a big factor in what we do on a day-to-day operation. And yes, size matters. As I mentioned before, systems get together, it gets very complex, and we have to make sure that these systems are all operating at optimum rates if we want to get production. And if we do have a BIP in one system, if a guy decides to do a move here, he has to think, what's the repercussions on the other side of the refinery? So everybody needs to be talking together and see how things are. And if you ever wonder your importance as a power engineer in this situation, shut the water off at lunch for a few hours and see how that goes. We keep the lights on, and it all starts with the process from water. I'm not going to get into details with this diagram because it doesn't really explain what this talk is all about, but it gives you a little bit of understanding of the water that we use, the steam production is generated from it, and the processes that are involved. But in this case, with the fire, it wasn't so much the production, it was how to shut it down. Because things can go wrong. And when they go wrong, it doesn't matter what kind of disaster preparation that you've done, I can guarantee you've never covered it all. There is no possible way to cover each and everything. You can look at high temperatures, low temperatures, you could look at loss of power, bringing your power back online. But you are not going to be able to cover anything, and that's where the experience comes in. Fires happen all the time. In Alberta, we deal with forest fires on a regular basis, so much so that we become complacent. And when this fire started, I was saying to a friend of mine in March, months prior to this fire starting, he said, wow, it's a really dry year this year. We're gonna have to be careful, let's hope for some rain. And everybody's like, yeah, we know, it's, it happens every year. It's the way it is, it's Alberta. We got forest close by. But this year, it was different because we just elected a new provincial government. And they weren't used to dealing with budgets in firefighting. And as new governments come in, they want to save money, makes them look good, get votes, get reelected. And they cut the budget. They cut the budget by about $10 million. And that, in turn, would be one of the factors that would be looked at later on in hindsight. May 1st rolls around. I'm working on the turnaround. Everything's good. Get up, go to work, come back. I look down, see a little bit of smoke in the distance. Not a big deal. It's a fire. It's just outside of town. See it all the time. Not a big deal. I see some helicopters running around. Things look good. Go to work. get to bed, or pardon me, go home, get to bed, get up later on, go back to work, May 2nd, do my job, come back. All of a sudden there's a detour. Can't get home. Well, this is a drag. Now, this fire is starting to tweak my melon. It's an inconvenience. Come on, man. I've worked a 12-hour shift. I've got to spend an extra hour and a half now getting home because we got this stupid detour. And all because of what? Now I'm gonna be tired, I'm not gonna get enough sleep. Just deal with this, all right? Wake up in the morning, it was fine. The sun was blue, clouds were out. I looked around, I thought, hey, this is awesome. They got this, they got it under control. Good job, guys. Jump in my vehicle, go to work. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we're getting calls. Things are happening in town. What do you mean? Well, that fire looks like it's coming into town and it's starting to take out some of the local buildings and long-time history of artifacts and houses that have been there for years and people. So as this goes on, we're contemplating what to do. At first it was like, oh, okay, do you need to go to town to get stuff because it looks like they're going to evacuate? Okay, right on. Let's start evacuating. Let's get out. This is legit, people. This is legit. We had buses that were driving through this kind of fire. You can't see it in here, but they were driving through an area of town, a full bus full of people that veered off a main road because trees were burning and falling, and they were going off into the ditch and driving to get stuck, at which point the doors would open and people would flail out of the bus, running for whatever thing they could. As vehicles were driving down the road, people out of the bus would jump in the back of pickup trucks just to try and get out of town. They didn't want to stick around. There was no choice in the matter. You had to get out. There's nowhere to go. There's 88,000 people that had to evacuate one way out of town. One way. And that was south. You can't do it. It's physically impossible to direct that much flow of traffic to that area. So there's no other way to go. So the decisions that were made in the highlight of the emergency was to have some of the employees, the families of the employees that worked at the corporation that I work for, to come out to where we have a shelter. We have a camp on site. It's a 2,500 man camp, and they said, anybody who's got family members, bring them out now. And you can come out here and you can settle all in, and we're going to turn around and we're going to give you a place to go, and hopefully that'll ease some of the burden. So as people are racing north to come out to where we are, the rest of the town and the city for that matter are trying to go south. Our camp houses 2,500 people. Within minutes, we had 4,000 people show up on your doorstep. Not only do we not have the facilities to house these people, but wait a minute, we don't have enough blankets, we don't have towels, we don't have anywhere really to put them. And what about food? How are we going to feed these people? How long are they going to be here? But it didn't matter to that, because people's lives were turned upside down instantly. And as they came out to sight, and I visualized this so clearly, we were getting ready to get this camp back into service. It had been shut down for quite some time, so we were flushing lines, trying to get water going so that we could actually have potable water for the people. We're trying to organize everybody to come in to find a room for them for starters, and more importantly, to just try and find out if everybody's accountable. And as I look at this chaos evolving, I sit over on a step, and I look down, and I see 2 children playing in the grass. And they're running around, and they're giggling with a dog, and they see this dog running, chasing these children back and forth. And I thought to myself, that was the solace that these children had, was the fun of a puppy. They had no idea what was going around them. Their parents were walking around in a state of confusion, fear. You're trying to think to yourself, I gotta make sure my kids are taken care of, I gotta make sure of, what about my house? What about the wedding ring that my grandmother gave me that's sitting in my little desktop drawer? Is it going to be there when I get back? I can't replace this stuff. And so as I sit down and I watch these children playing, it dawned on me, it's not about me anymore. It's not about production. It's about, I'm trying to get to the next one. It's not about profits. It's about humanitarian effort. There's no way that we can forget, that we can think about pumping oil or making production. We've got to save ourselves. So as we try to find a place for everybody to go, we slowly get them in, and then we think, okay, that starts. Day one rolls around, oh, where am I going to sleep? Okay, there's a spot in my truck, because I'm not going to take away a family's house that's got children and their dogs that are sitting there, and I'm going to sleep in one room and I can house 4 people. I slept in my vehicle that night. I got up the next day, I went to work, and you know, the other refineries in the area knew about this situation as well and had to deal with it in accordance. There are a lot of runways that you don't know about up north in Fort McMurray. Because we have all these outdoor camps, we have to have supplies brought in and out. And so they have a lot of runways available. Unfortunately, one of the corporations had a runway that we could bring in a 737 with supplies. And when it left, it was taking people with it. Now you want to move, 88,000 people? Don't have to worry about that, because 50 or 60,000 left. So we got 25,000 left up north. How many trips is that going to take in a 737 to get these people out? It's going to take more than I care to count, probably 20, 30, 40 trips. So when it comes down to this, we all realized there's only one thing to do. By day 7, on May 7th, May 6th, I went to work. I finished my shift. I got home at 8 o'clock, I went to bed at 11 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. And somebody was hammering on the door. They said, Andy, you gotta get up, we're shutting down the refinery. I said, what? They said, yeah, we're shutting down the refinery. And as I wake up, I'm startled, and I look over, and I could barely see across my room. And it was at that moment, as I'm crawling out the door, and I'm looking, I'm like, wow, this place looks like it's on fire. No, it's not on fire. That's the smoke rolling in from 200,000 hectares of burning brush out our back door. Now to just put that into perspective, the GTA is 64,000 hectares. That's almost over 3 times the size of the GTA, and that's the fire that by this time has spread from something I noticed 5 days prior as an annoyance. So I'm running out, and I'm swiping through the gate for one of the last times, actually. And as I'm swiping through the gate, I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is the first time I'm actually scared. Am I going to be able to get out of here? I got a time bomb behind me. We got a hydrogen facility, we got a naphtha facility. How close can this fire get? What's going to happen? What do you mean, shut it down? By shutting it down means that I got to shut off my nitrogen systems. I got to shut off my fire suppression systems. What do you mean, shut it down? What happens when there's no nitrogen on a naphtha tank and that little bit of heat from the fire comes by? What's going to be left of my work when I get here? And these are all the things that had to be answered by corporate. But they didn't care about profits anymore. They cared about their people. Because without people, there are no profits. And you're making decisions in a blink of an eye that you can't turn back on, but you don't have the time to work it out on a spreadsheet and have a meeting and talk to this person and that person and, oh yeah, let's order McDonald's and we'll get some donuts brought in. Well, McDonald's and the donuts aren't open from Timmy's. As a matter of fact, that little dinner that you had today might be the last one you have for the next 4 or 5 days, because there isn't anything else. And the only thing I cared about was if I was going to eat tomorrow. I remember my one meal, I sat down in the morning and I had a meal with 3 tater tots, and it was like a half piece of a wrap, if you will, and a bit of cheese and a piece of ham inside there. And I was being fed like a king. I looked down and they said, you gotta eat. And I said, what about that lady over there? She's got the 2 children, she's breastfeeding. She's gonna have to wait. You need to run the refinery, you eat first. Who am I? This woman has been taken out of her home and the comfort that she has, and now I'm eating better than she is. What gives me that right? So it was decisions like this that were made that were really, really hard to fathom. And we did what we could to get these people to safety. And as the planes were loading out people and trying to bring in supplies, they had to battle with the air activity as well. There's helicopters flying around, there's water bombers going around, and there's fire everywhere. And the people that you don't realize that are doing all the work are the ones that are in the air, the ones that are out on command posts trying to find out what to do next with this. And it was just unfathomable that we were experiencing something that was so intense, but we didn't have time to think about it. We didn't have time to dwell on it. We had to react. And it finally came down. I was sitting in the control room. I've got a respirator on, for God's sakes. I can't breathe normally. You can barely see across the control room. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm gonna shut this down. Okay, how are we gonna do this? Wait a minute. This refinery's been running for decades. What do you mean shut it down? Nobody's ever done this before. The procedures that we have were developed after it was running. What's the first thing that we do? Well, we're gonna trim, slim, and drop it. We're gonna cut back loads. We're gonna slowly put pressure on the back of the other areas. As they see the pressure build up, they're gonna start to cut, and eventually we'll get to the point where we can shut everything down safely. I was stuck on nitrogen. I said, well, what about the nitrogen facility? Once the nitrogen plant goes down, what do we do? It's what's gonna happen? And I was told numerous times, Andy, don't worry about that. Don't ask that. And the truth was, we were all scared about it, but nobody knew the answer. But we had to do it. So we slowly drop everything back. We slowly start to cut things back. And eventually, we did what would take us 8 days to do safely. We did it in under 24 hours. Nobody got injured. Nobody got burnt, hurt. Nobody even broke a fingernail, to be honest with you. It was done that quickly, that safely, and we all left. And we closed the gate. I drove home that day thinking to myself, I'm so glad this didn't happen. You take a 900-pound steam line and it runs at about 700 degrees C, and I'm just throwing that out there as a guess. It's probably closer to about 500. But if you take that line and it runs for 3 miles, and it's our main steam conduit line, and it's our main steam supply line, and you take that and you knock that heat off right away, you're gonna get thermal shock. And that line that might run a mile could shrink about 10 meters as it starts to cool. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but what's holding it up? Hangers. And what's it gonna do? It's gonna rip everything right off the walls. It's gonna take everything with it. And these are some of the things that we had to consider while we did this. And what kind of shocks that we were having to the rest of our systems. It's gonna cost us a lot of money to do this. You wanna worry about people before profits? How important are these people? I'm looking at $15 to $20 or $20 million daily in production loss. Who's gonna write that one up? We gotta start this thing up. Can we do it? What if we need parts? How am I gonna get them up here? It's not like I can bring in a heavy hauler to start moving stuff through a Learjet. It's just not practical. You can't run through town. There's nowhere to go. The only way you're getting in there is by helicopters, by air. So how are we gonna meet some of these things? And then staffing, that was key. By the time we shut everything down on May 7th, we went from a staff of 4,500 regular employees to about 100. That was the last 100 to 120 employees left to shut everything off. And I can be honest with you, my mind was in nowhere near operational capability. I was so tired. I was just trying to stay awake, and I was worried about our house. I didn't know when we were where I was gonna live when I came back. I didn't know if the house was still gonna be there. And I didn't know when we were going to start up, how we were going to go about doing this. But I'm not alone. How many people are like me as well? I've got the people that are in my crew, but how many of their family members are going to be so distraught about this evacuation as people are driving through forest that's burning and trees are falling over their vehicles? Am I going to be able to leave my family like that? My wife is going to need me. I can't come into this. So these are some of the things that you have to ask yourself when you get into these situations, because you will not know until you're there. So the decision was made. We looked at the costs of what we were sitting in. Just to give you an idea, this is just a chart stating some of the costs that I've had for the costliest events in the history of Canada. The fire that we had, the ice storm in Quebec that everybody, I think it was 98 or 99, something like that. That ran about $2.18 billion. This one affected global, or Canadian GDP. We are at about $10 billion in costs for this evacuation and this subsequent fire. And the other thing that I might add is that we, at the corporation that I was working for and the refinery I was working at, weren't the only ones going through these same decisions. Every one of us is out there, whether it be Syncrude, Shell, whether it be CNRL, whether it be Horizon, whether it be Imperial Oil, whether it be Suncor, whether it be Dover facilities, every one of them are faced with the same decision. We gotta shut down. How many other people are making these decisions that are affecting their overall budget and impact? What are the human costs associated with all this? How much mental damage has gone to these people that have lost their houses? I need this guy to come back and run one of my panels. I need him to operate a facility. Where's his mind going to be when I need to start up? He's not going to be with me. He's going to be dealing with his family. So these are things that you have to take into consideration when the time comes, because there is no second guessing this. You got to make a decision. And like I said, you don't have time. That beast is at your door. That's me. You see that? That big dip there? I did that. We shut down, and it affects everybody. That was non-conventional crude production from the oil sands for the time that we dropped down. Those are the people that make the difference. And when I was evacuating and I was driving through town, I'll never forget this gentleman with his going like this constantly, directing traffic. And he's going like this, and that's all he does, 12 hours a day. That guy's gonna end up with some serious shoulder problems when he's done it. These are the guys that make the difference. And hats off to them. And hats off to all the people that had supplies for us. When you leave Fort McMurray, because it's such an isolated area, there's a sign before you leave south toward Edmonton. It says, make sure you're fueled up. You don't get any fuel services for 200 kilometers. So you have to drive for 2 hours without gas. You gotta have gas. So many people didn't have enough fuel to get out. My vehicle is never under 3/4 of a tank anymore, ever. You're coming back? What are you looking at? Where's your home? At home. What do I come back to? I sat at my house, fortunately, in this instance. I have another property that was down south. I was staying at friends in Fort McMurray. And as I'm home, all I can think of is, what about these guys back there? They need me. You can't relax, you can't rest. You're constantly thinking, what can I do to help? Because you feel useless when you're sitting at home trying to rest and recover. And it just wasn't there. I was more concerned about my coworkers. I was more concerned about getting the place that I work at, the place that I love, to get it back running, as opposed to anything else. And as I drove through town and you see visions like this, it starts to hit you. My God, we're in a war zone here. It's absolutely insane. It's phenomenal. The land of trees. It's my sanctuary. Yeah. All those fun days camping, fishing, hunting, cycling. Yeah, you don't have that anymore. You got burnt trees all around you. 7 days later, I was contacted to fly corporate backup and start up the refinery. I had needed an extra 4 days. They called me after day 3. I just physically could not do it. It started to sink in, and the emotions and everything that goes through you is so overwhelming. By day 7, I couldn't wait to get back to work. What work? What work? They fly to corporate, we land, we get in. Okay, we're gonna start this up. Right on, let's do it. Okay, how? Well, we need steam. Really? How are we gonna do that? Boilers are down. Let's just start up a boiler. With what? You're gonna use cold water? You can't use cold water in a boiler. It's not like throwing water in your tea kettle, plugging it in, and having a nice hot water to pour onto your coffee. You can't do that with these systems because you'll destroy them. So you have a $70, $80 million boiler, and if you don't treat the water that goes in it properly, you're gonna create corrosion. It's called oxygen pitting, and you'll have that thing destroyed within 6 months. And then anything that's going into that, out of that system, like turbines that are turning your rotors to make your electricity to power your facility, are also gonna get hit. So we had to consider how we're gonna start this up. We've never done it because it's always been running. But there's no way we can use that 900-pound steam line now because we knew we cooled it too fast, and we have to inspect that first. And it all boiled down to deaeration. And one old man, and I'll never forget this, he stands up and he says, "What about those ugly boilers you got in the corner?" He didn't actually say it that way. But the truth is, we're rednecks, right? So anyway, somebody said, yeah, he's actually got a good point. What about those ugly boilers that we never use? Why don't we fire one of them up and run the steam over to the deaerators until we can actually make water that's purified enough and treated enough that we can get our main utility boiler running. And when that happens, it'll give us time to expect this other 900-pound steam header. The key was to try to create 50-pound steam that we normally took off a 900-pound line and let down. But we didn't do it. But if we didn't have those pieces of junk that nobody liked, that we called Swiss cheese, we wouldn't have been up today. So we had a plan. We had an idea where to go with this and what we were gonna do and how we were gonna make it happen. And now it's time to put this together. So it's check, recheck, and check again. And there's so many conversations going on. And you know, it's funny that Neil mentioned, he says you rely on some of your retirement staff. And we did. We flew guys in that were 30 years in retirement. Well, 30-year services that were in retirement. And they were just giddy. They're like, really? We get to start this up again? It's like, yeah, can you give us a hand? Oh yeah. They were just excited because, man, they were here at the startup 30, 40 years ago. They knew about it. But things had changed so much. And we had added so many new systems that became a part of the intricacies of it all. They were also stumped on how to do this. And that's where you all have to work together. Your old staff, your new staff, all have to come together because your people, once again, are gonna make the difference. We finally got it together, and within 6 weeks after the evacuation, we fired it up. And we started producing oil again, and within another week after we had fired up, we had started making production. And not only did we start making production, we exceeded production targets, and we had record production for the next 2 consecutive months that gave us a positive quarter on which something that would have been just detrimental to our balance sheet in the end. And then the nice thing about it was we all took our time and we prayed to the rain gods, and the rain came. And the fire shifted and it went down to Saskatchewan, and I love Saskatchewan people, but I was glad to see it go. It did make it stops a little over the border, and eventually it did finally get put out, I believe, at the end of June or July. And we just basically watched it go because we couldn't get back to it. So the big thing was, when it comes down to it, when you're in a situation you've never been in before, you need to ask yourself, design is fine, but what can it do? And it always brings me back to the line in the Apollo 13 movie. I don't know if it's not Neil Patrick Harris, but the guy that was in the command center, he said, I don't care what it's designed to do, I want to know what it can do. And that is the idea that got us out of the pickle that we were in. If we took around and we looked at the plain Jane and what we designed it to do, we still wouldn't have been able to start it up. We had to think outside the box. Use your resources. They are going to come from a place that you'll never expect, but when they do, you'll know that they're there. Plan for the unplannable. I know that sounds so vague and so obscure, but it's true. I mean, the only thing we need to do left is probably an earthquake, because we got fire down pat this year. It's never going to happen again, I promise you that. Distribution overlaps create resistance. Redundancies are great, but when you have intricate systems that are so closely integrated, can you pull one out and keep your process going? If you leave it in there and it starts to fall apart, how is that going to affect the rest of your system? So that's where the distribution and the overlapping created the resilience. And ask for help. My gosh, ask for help. We went to our seniors that went and asked, we brought them back from their experience. Don't be shy. There's nobody humble in this there's nobody that's going to be humbled by this, because in the end we're all in this for one thing, and that's to save where we work and to get back online. So that's all I got. Thank you very much.
I'm sure there's going to be a few questions at the very least. I need to personally thank you, Andy, for once again just coming out here, and I know it's really close to your heart, and it matters a lot. I'm sure there's some horrible memories and good memories as well out of that whole experience, and the photos you put up there, shocking to us, especially here. Obviously not seeing that firsthand. I can only imagine what trauma you're experiencing. Even I can tell even while you're speaking, you're kind of.
It's going to be something to live with me for the rest of my life, and to this day, I don't go down a highway and ask myself, what if? And I have to be prepared for it, so Boy Scouts paid off.
sharing. I'm just kidding. No, it's amazing. So listen, thank you so much for coming all the way to Ottawa for an entire week at that. Out here, we're blessed to have you. The few of us that are here are extremely fortunate to hear your story and hopefully learn from that situation that you were put into to help us better plan for some disasters. And we were coming close to a flood this year, nothing compared to what you were experiencing, but nevertheless, it is a concern. And we always find that people will still look after themselves, and families first, aunts, uncles, nephews, nieces, whatever the case may be, you're going to look after your family first. We cannot really depend on that staff to come back to work, and I think you lived that dream. I mean, you told us a story the other day about how you were on the phone with some guy in, I think it was Newfoundland or something like that, or New Brunswick.
Oh, go ahead.
When you were calling him saying, oh, are you coming back? And he's like,
oh, it's my friend from Qatar, actually. I have a friend who works at, he's an instructor in Qatar. And I said to him, well, things get kind of shaky down there. You're going to come down? And he's going, well, I got to get out. And it looks like Canadian Embassy is not as easy as it looks. And I might have to go to the US Embassy. I said, but you've got a Canadian passport and your wife is Chinese. He says, yeah, these are the hoops that we have to jump through. So eventually he did finally make his way through, but not without some obscure planning to do so.
Well, listen, I'd like to open the floor for questions, because I've been absolutely fortunate enough to spend a significant amount of time with Andy over the past few months, at least over the phone, and this past week and weekend as well. So I'm going to leave it to you folks. Don't make him cry. I'll pass this over here. I'm just gonna.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Andy. I found that very moving.
Well, thank you.
I'm just wondering what happened with your family. How is your wife coping with all this while it's going on?
It's funny you mention that because my brother and I communicated quite extensively throughout the event, as well as my wife and I. I had to limit the amount of things I could tell my wife just so she didn't get worried about it. My brother was my solace. Just trying to explain to him where we were and to wrap my head around it. But the thing is where we were situated at, the biggest challenge for me was knowing that we couldn't go any further north. That was it. The road's end. That was it. We were stuck there. So if the fire started to come with us, come toward us, the only way to get out was via aircraft, whether it be helicopter or a jet. We did have a contingency plan for that. We had a jet on standby, ready to start evacuating the last bit of staff if need be. These aren't things I'm going to tell my wife. I don't need her to know this. I need her to know that I'm safe, that everything's okay, and to try and keep a big head on my shoulders, if you will, and try to feed her as little information and try to rectify what she's seeing on the news, because they are limited as well. Go ahead.
I'm excited to hear this question.
That's an incredible story. I mean, I'm a chemical engineer by training, so I know what a big bomb a refinery is. One of the things I'm really curious, I've done a lot of, coming from the nuclear industry, done a lot of disaster planning, a lot of simulations, and one of the things that's always been a problem is communication and information sharing. So I'm just curious, when you were in the heat of it, trying to shut it down, how did you get information from the field to the control room, consolidate your different experts? How did that work?
We did a lot of pre-planning prior to the actual execution of the turnaround, of the shutdown, sorry. So I know it sounds crazy, but meeting rooms really come into play. You need to sit down. You need to sit down and decide who's going to go first and how we're going to do this. And like I said, some of these decisions were made very quickly. As far as communication in the field, we all have, because of the size of the refinery is so large, we have different channels for people to be on, because I don't really care what's happening over in another department when I have to worry about where I'm at in the water treatment side of things. So the cokers can deal with their thing, upgrading can deal with their thing, hydrogen facilities can deal with their thing, and I'm going to deal with mine. And the fortunate part about our communication is a lot of it's connected with DCS systems. That's just an acronym for data communication systems. But when this, he's laughing at me. So when I'm sitting on a panel and I'm looking and I see my pressures go up, I know somebody made a move somewhere else. Or if my load's going down, somebody's pulling more, and then I can respond accordingly. So in conjunction, to answer your question, Jill, in conjunction with meetings, in conjunction with just good communication on the air and actually execution, and having the right people at the right time. And that's another thing. When I looked at the people who were there to shut it down, I just shook my head. I'm like, I would never have expected this guy to be here. He's one of the laziest, do-nothing people I could ever imagine. But my God, can this guy pull it off in the heat of the moment. So you'll be surprised what you're left with.
That's a killer story.
Yeah.
You may want to explain what coker is, just to...
Coker, oh gosh, fractionation. When bitumen gets put into a process, we actually heat it up because it's too thick to pump. So we heat it up, and those emulsified and slurries are now pumped into what's called a coker. The cokers are the money makers of a refinery. And what they do is they separate the high-end distillation fractures, if you will. It's like a glorified fractionation tower of different types of gases, whether it be methanes, ethanes, naphthas, sulfur dioxides, whatever. And those will come out at different intervals based on heat. The coke is what's left. It's a byproduct. It's basically a solid carbonaceous material. It's got really no heat value to it, so it goes back up into a storage facility for later use if we can find one for it.
That's amazing. I just have to say,
I'm going to get to your question there. I just have to say, is for us in Ottawa here, we're dealing with Legionnaire's disease and cooling towers, and you're dealing with a rather large set of bombs.
Yeah.
Again,
Exactly.
back to 100 ways to die on your campus.
Go ahead. I'll
Yes,
just come
thanks,
up.
Andy.
Yeah.
Great presentation. You wrapped up by saying plan for the unplanned. And my question to you is with hindsight now, and a bit of time, what are the 1, 2, or 3 things you think the company could have done? Because I don't want to tackle it from a fire perspective and political perspective, but what are the things that the company could have done to maybe improve the outcome, make it safer, or anything that would have made the situation better all around, or through whatever dimension you want to look at it?
That's an excellent question. It very much is, because a lot of people will say the corporation or whatever didn't do enough. The company I work for and those companies that were involved in this went way over and above to make sure that everybody was safe. And even those that wanted to stay behind and make sure that we could continue to run this refinery and not do that and drag them out the gate, that was a hard decision to make. And for them to choose that, hats off to those individuals, especially in CEOs and CFOs that are making those decisions in corporate. As far as the planning aspect would concern, procedure development. That was key, because some of our procedures were so outdated that they didn't take into account of certain expansions that we're taking. Sure, operations will go through the motions day in, day out, and they know how these things run. But until you put it down for Joe Blow, who's never done it before, it's useless to you. You can't pick somebody's brain when they're not there or available to be called upon. So procedure development was one of them. Risk management in terms of getting on top of these things sooner. Sometimes not waiting for the evacuation to happen, but being proactive in establishing evacuation criteria beforehand. We were caught off guard, and I blame it a bit on complacency, and I say that because it's the Alberta way. We deal with forest fires so much every year. And Sean, you know what it's like to be evacuated. Yeah, I remember as a kid in Swan Hills playing grass hockey, looking at the smoke going, yes, it's getting kind of close, 1981. And just not thinking of it. It wasn't until the truck started driving around and said, get out, that we actually, okay, let's take opportunity of this. So pre-planning was huge. Risk management, and I would say procedural, for sure, to updating our procedures.
you had good corporate level support, very good ethical people out there making.
We had amazing corporate level support, and even after the fact, the follow-up with it, because you have to realize too, when we're shut down like this, we don't have houses to go to. We need to bring this refinery up, but we can't go into town. There's no stop at home and grab a sandwich and come out to work. There's none of that. So corporate had to find a place for us to live. But everybody's gone. Who's going to run these camps? So organizing all that and getting it to come around, and just the appreciation for having a clean pair of underwear. Oh, it's the simple things in life that mattered most after something like this. I got my oil changed and the guy laughs at me. He says, "What's that sloshing around in the back?" I said, "That's my 2.5 gallons of water." And he says, "Why do you need that?" I said, "If you live in Fort McMurray, you'd understand." That's about it. If there are any more questions, go ahead.
I know we were short on time and kind of going fast. It's a large deck, but I think that there was one slide at the end that kind of wrapped it up what matters most. Can we take a look at that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, sorry, go ahead. Yes, your heroes are invisible at times. That one is key. And that's, plans do go wrong. Accept it. That's what makes you innovative. When you're a large corporation, when you lead the industry in what you do, prepare to be innovative in a time of crisis, because you are going to be called upon to do that. You are paving the way. The larger you get, the more diverse you need to become. Integrated systems, it's nice to have a little piece. That was one thing that Ryan pointed out that was really critical that I picked up on. He says, you got phase 1, you got phase 2, you got phase 3. How about if I pull out phase 3? Can phase 2 work with phase 4 along with phase 1? Or am I going to be able to put phase 3 in and can't run without it? So these are things that you have to think about before you expand these massive data centers. In conjunction with, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be a data center, it could be a refinery, it could be whatever, but just to have that diversity, it's going to be key later on. Well,
you know what, if I may just say something just to help, and maybe you shed some light on it. Although Andy's story has a kind of a distant relationship to a large facility in terms of a data center, which is nowhere near as large as your campus even, or any facility on your campus. But what we see is more and more people are saying, well, I'll just generate the power, or we'll just build our own generation plant, or, you know, our data center, we can just, whatever, you know, it's getting to 20 megawatt, we'll go to 50 megawatt, we'll go to 100 megawatt, we'll just have our own generation. Maybe we should buy land next to water so we can use our own hydro facility and turbines. And it's very challenging to explain to some people who may have never, let alone seen equipment like this, but even read about operating it, or read about the challenges of operating it, and the people you need, the experience you need, the process that you need, like you were able to sit down and rehearse, not once, but multiple times, what you would do in the event of a startup of something you've never done before, and you know them so intimately it's coursing through your veins. The idea that you're going to have your own data center, and you're going to have your own generation facility, be whatever it is, like it doesn't matter if it's off natural gas or I don't really care. How do you anticipate managing that when you have no idea what you're getting into? We get those requests to investigate it, and we waste, I would say we waste a lot of time investigating those solutions. So I don't know what you say about that. What do you say about that?
You can go as large as you want. That's wonderful, great, and yes, that is something we can take into consideration. But in a time of an emergency, who's staffing it? You can have an awesome data center and full staffing. We'll get it running wonderfully. The Twin Towers, when they went down, those data centers were involved. Who do you think wanted to come back and get those back up and running? Not many people. So these are things that you have to consider. Minimal staffing. Can you run on a skeleton crew? Because this is what you're going to be faced with. People's minds get twisted, and it's just because of what it is. So it's something to consider.